I never thought I'd own my dream home before 30, but there I was, standing in front of a gorgeous Victorian house with wraparound porches and bay windows. My name is Olivia Carter, and after grinding for years as a financial consultant, I finally saved up enough to buy this house on my own. "This is it, James," I said, gripping my husband's hand as we stood in the driveway. "What do you think?" James smiled, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's incredible, Liv. You did this." That was one of the things I loved about James. He never felt insecure about my success. When I told him I wanted the house in my name since I was the one paying for it, he didn't even hesitate. "You earned it," he had said, wrapping an arm around me. "Besides, I'm putting money aside for our future kids. We're a team, right?" I had hugged him tight, grateful for such a supportive husband. Most men I knew wouldn't be thrilled about their wife buying a house solo, but James? He made me feel like we were in this together. The house was everything I had ever dreamed of: 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen, and a backyard that would be perfect for summer barbecues and, one day, kids running around. I had worked the numbers carefully so that the mortgage wouldn't be a burden. I was always practical that way. "We should invite my parents over this weekend," James suggested as we unpacked. "They'll want to see it." "Great idea. Let's visit mine too." That night, as we sat on the front porch swing, watching the sunset, everything felt perfect. We talked about how we'd decorate, where we'd plant a garden, and which room might eventually become a nursery. Later, as I lay in bed, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, a deep sense of peace settled over me. I had a loving husband, a stunning home, and a bright future ahead. Nothing could go wrong, or so I thought. Emma settled into the guest bedroom within a day. At first, it felt natural having her around like when we were kids, sharing late-night talks and joking over breakfast. She'd always been the free spirit of the family, bouncing between jobs and apartments, never quite finding her footing. "I'll help out while I'm here," she insisted. And true to her word, she did. The house was cleaner, dinner was often waiting when I got home, and she even took it upon herself to run errands. If she had any stress about finding a new job, she didn't show it. But soon, little things started nagging at me. "James, here's your coffee," Emma would say in the morning, placing it in front of him with a sweet smile. "Black, just how you like it." "Olivia always makes it too sweet, doesn't she?" James chuckled. "Yeah, she does." The first time, I brushed it off. A joke. No big deal. But then it kept happening. "Wow, James. You're really handy," Emma gushed one afternoon as he fixed a cabinet hinge. "If I ever have a house, I hope my husband is just like you." She said it right in front of me, like I wasn't even there. James just laughed it off, but something about the way Emma looked at him made my stomach twist. Then there was the touching. Small, seemingly innocent. A hand on his shoulder, a playful shove during a joke. Always casual. Always just enough to make me question if I was imagining it. The tipping point came when I walked into the living room late one night and found Emma curled up on the couch next to James, wrapped in a blanket, their heads leaning in close as they whispered and laughed. I stood there for a second, my heart hammering in my chest. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. They both looked up. "Just watching a movie," Emma said easily. James couldn't sleep, so I kept him company. My jaw tightened. "You have your own room." James shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "Liv, it's nothing. You are already asleep." I let out a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was nothing. But the unease wouldn't go away. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's presence became more than just a temporary stay. She slipped into our daily life so seamlessly it was like she'd always been there. She took over the grocery shopping, the laundry. She even rearranged the kitchen cabinets, claiming it was more efficient that way. "I hope you don't mind," she said, smiling. "I just thought it made more sense." It was like my home wasn't mine anymore. Then, one evening, I got home late from work to find Emma standing by the stove, stirring something in a pot. She was wearing one of James's old t-shirts, the fabric draping loosely over her frame. James sat at the kitchen island, sipping wine, watching her cook. "Smells amazing," he said. Emma beamed. "It's your favorite chicken piccata. That was my dish, my go-to meal to surprise him." And there she was, standing in my kitchen, cooking it for my husband in his shirt. Something inside me snapped. "Emma," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "Can we talk?" "Now." She blinked, all innocence. "Of course." I led her to the hallway, out of James's earshot. "You need to start looking for a place," I said, crossing my arms. "It's been over a month." Emma's expression shifted, her smile fading. "Liv, I'm trying, but rent is insane, and my hours are still cut." "You want me to end up homeless?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "You're not homeless. Mom and Dad would take you in." She sighed dramatically. "You know, that's not realistic. They live too far, and I need to be near job opportunities." Frustration bubbled inside me. "Emma, this was never supposed to be permanent." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Are you kicking me out because you're jealous?" I froze. "What?" She smirked. "You've been acting weird ever since I moved in. Just admit it, you don't like James and me getting along." A chill ran down my spine. The way she said it like it was some game she was winning made my skin crawl. I took a deep breath. "This isn't up for discussion. You need to start making real plans to leave." She held my gaze for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine, if that's what you want." But the look in her eyes told me she wasn't going anywhere. And I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. I tried to shake off the unease after that conversation, convincing myself that I was just overthinking. Emma had always been a little selfish, a little entitled, but she was still my sister. Maybe she really was just struggling, and I was being too harsh. For the next few days, things felt normal, or at least, I wanted them to. Emma didn't make any more passive-aggressive remarks. James and I had a nice dinner date, and I even started to feel like maybe I'd overreacted. Then, late one night, I woke up to an empty bed. James was gone. Confused, I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway. The house was silent, but a soft glow flickered from the living room. My heart pounded as I turned the corner. There they were, James and Emma, sitting way too close on the couch, whispering. James was shirtless, his hair slightly disheveled, and Emma was curled up under a blanket with a glass of wine in her hand. I cleared my throat. Both of them turned at once. "Oh, Liv," Emma said, all too casually. "We didn't wake you, did we?" James looked guilty as hell. "What's going on?" I asked, crossing my arms. James ran a hand through his hair. I couldn't sleep. Emma was still up, so we were just talking. "Talking," the first repeated, my voice flat. Emma stretched dramatically. "Yeah, just reminiscing about old times. You know, when we were kids." "No big deal." I stared at her, then at James. Every instinct in my body was screaming. I wanted to believe him, believe that my husband wasn't doing exactly what it looked like. But that little voice in the back of my head, the one I had been trying to ignore for weeks, was getting louder. Something was not right, and I was going to find out what. The next day, I started paying closer attention. Little things stood out. Emma always seemed to be around when James was home. If I went into the kitchen, she was already there with him, laughing. If I came home from work early, I'd find them on the back porch, deep in conversation. James's phone was suddenly always face down. One afternoon, I decided to test something. I left work 2 hours early without telling anyone and pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I walked in quietly, setting my keys down without a sound. Laughter came from upstairs. My stomach twisted. I crept up the steps, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I reached the landing, I heard Emma's voice. "James, you are so bad," she giggled. A low chuckle followed. I turned the corner and froze. Emma was sitting on the bed, her legs crossed, James standing a few feet away, grinning. He was holding something in his hand. My silk robe. The one I kept on the back of the door. Am I interrupting something? My voice came out sharper than I intended. James's head snapped up, and Emma's smile didn't even falter. "Oh, hey, Liv!" she chirped. James was just showing me this robe. It's so soft. I stared at her. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. James cleared his throat and tossed the robe onto the bed. I was just grabbing something from the closet, and Emma was messing around. I nodded slowly, my heart racing. I wasn't stupid. Something was definitely going on. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to James, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. If I confronted him now, he'd just deny it. If I confronted Emma, she'd play dumb. No, I needed proof. Real proof. So the next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. And what he found? It shattered everything. Waiting for the investigator's results was pure torture. Every second, every interaction between James and Emma felt like a ticking time bomb. I started noticing even more how Emma would laugh just a little too hard at his jokes, how James seemed to linger when she spoke, the way they shared these looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I felt sick. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. A text from the investigator. Meet me at the coffee shop at 3 p.m. Got everything you need. My hands shook as I typed back a quick reply. I wasn't sure if I was ready to know, but I had no choice. When I arrived, the investigator, Mark, slid a folder across the table. He didn't sugarcoat it. I followed them yesterday while you were at work, he said, sipping his coffee. Went to a hotel, checked in for 3 hours. My heart plummeted. Here, he added, tapping the folder. Photos, payment records, everything. The first swallowed, forcing myself to open it. There it was, James and Emma walking into a hotel, her arm around his waist, his hand on the small of her back. Betrayal burned through me like acid. I flipped through the pages, seeing text logs he had recovered. Conversations between them, some flirty, some downright disgusting. Plans to meet. Complaints about me. She's always so busy with work. We should have been together from the start. I wish I could just wake up next to you every day. I clenched my fists. I had given James everything. I had let Emma into my home, and this was how they repaid me? I looked up at Mark, my voice steadier than I felt. Thank you, I said, closing the folder. I know exactly what I need to do. I didn't confront them right away. No, that would have been too easy. Too expected. Instead, I played along. That night, I came home and smiled like nothing was wrong. I let Emma serve dinner, let James kiss my cheek, let them think I was blissfully unaware. They had no idea I was planning their downfall. The first thing I did was visit my lawyer. Barbara, a sharp and ruthless woman, had handled my financials when I bought the house. When I slid the folder across her desk, she raised an eyebrow. This is enough to destroy him, she said after skimming the contents. I know, I replied. That's the plan. She leaned forward. You want to file for divorce immediately? Not just yet, I said, a smile creeping onto my lips. I want them to think they've won first, Barbara smirked. I like the way you think. For the next few days, I set the stage. First, I started dropping hints, fake phone calls where I pretended to be discussing selling the house, carefully placed mail about relocation services left on the kitchen counter. James took the bait quickly. Are you thinking of moving? He asked one night, feigning casual interest. I shrugged. Work's been talking about transferring me to New York. Nothing set in stone yet. I saw the flicker of excitement in his eyes. He thought he was about to win. Then I hit them with the final trap. One evening, I suggested a celebratory dinner. For everything we've built together, I had said sweetly, watching as James and Emma exchanged the tiniest glance. They had no idea I had invited both sets of parents, some mutual friends, and, of course, Barbara, who was going to help me rip their world apart. The restaurant was elegant, dimly lit, and perfect for what was about to happen. Everyone arrived, making small talk over drinks. James was smug, Emma was glowing, and I was calm. Too calm. Then, just as dessert was served, I stood up, tapping my glass. I just want to say how grateful I am, I started, smiling sweetly. To my wonderful husband for always supporting me, and to my dear sister for being such a constant presence in our lives. Emma beamed, probably thinking she had won. I turned to James. The first actually have a surprise for you, babe. His grin faltered. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. This, I said, tossing it onto the table, is proof that my husband and sister have been sneaking around behind my back. The room went silent. James paled. Emma's eyes went wide. I continued, my voice steady. Texts, photos, hotel receipts. You two really thought I wouldn't find out? James opened his mouth, but no words came out. Emma stammered. Liv, this isn't what it looks like. I let out a cold laugh. Oh, it is exactly what it looks like. I turned to my parents, whose faces were frozen in shock. Mom, Dad, remember when you called me selfish for asking Emma to move out? Well, now you know why. My mother gasped. My father's jaw clenched. Then, I looked at James's parents. Linda, George, this is the man you raised, a liar and a cheat. Linda covered her mouth. George shook his head in disgust. Finally, I turned back to James. And you? I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You thought you could take everything from me. My house, my money, my life. He flinched. I smiled, savoring the moment. Well, surprise? The house? Mine. The bank account? Mine. Everything you've been living off of? Mine. Emma started crying. Liv, please. We didn't mean save it. I cut her off. I've already filed for divorce, James. Barbara has the papers. Oh, and since you have no assets, good luck affording a lawyer. James looked like he was going to be sick. I turned to Emma. And you? You thought you were stealing a wealthy man. Turns out you were just screwing a broke idiot. Gasps echoed around the table. James stood abruptly. We should go. I laughed. Oh, you definitely should. In fact, let me help you. I reached into my bag and pulled out another envelope. What's that? Emma sniffled. I grinned. An eviction notice. Their faces drained of color. Yep, I said, popping the ip. Since you two love playing house so much, now you can find your own. Emma let out a strangled noise. But I don't have anywhere to. Not my problem, I said, leaning in close. You should have thought of that before you screwed my husband. With that, I turned on my heel, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the restaurant. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for months finally lifted. I was free, and they were done. The silence that followed me out of that restaurant was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I didn't look back, didn't care to see James and Emma scrambling to explain themselves to our stunned family and friends. Let them deal with their own mess. I had already cleaned up mine. When I got home, I felt lighter than I had in months. I took off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in my house, savoring the victory. No more tiptoeing around my own home. No more fake smiles. No more betrayal disguised as kindness. Just me, my peace, and the satisfying knowledge that their world was about to collapse. The fallout came fast. James tried calling me first. I let it go to voicemail. The text started pouring in after that. James, we need to talk. James, Olivia, please. Can we just explain? James, the first made a mistake. I love you. I stared at my phone, shaking my head. Love? Love? If he had loved me, he wouldn't have snuck around behind my back. If he had loved me, he wouldn't have treated my house, my life, like something he could just slide Emma into when he thought I wasn't looking. Then came Emma. Emma, live, please. I'm so sorry. Emma, I didn't mean for this to happen. Emma, I need somewhere to stay. Please don't do this to me. I almost laughed out loud at that one. Don't do this to you? As if I was the one who had betrayed her. As if I had done anything but give her a home when she needed it. I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I forwarded the divorce papers to James's email, just to make it clear that I wasn't playing around. Then I blocked both of them. The next day, I stopped by Barbara's office to finalize the details. James called me, she said as I sat down. I rolled my eyes. Of course he did. Let me guess he wants to fight for the house? Barbara smirked. He tried. But the minute I reminded him that his name was on nothing, not the deed, not the mortgage, not the bank accounts, he backed off. I exhaled, relief washing over me. It was done. Well, I said, leaning back. That's that. Barbara tilted her head. Not entirely. He still needs a place to stay. And from what I hear, so does Emma. I frowned. What do you mean? She slid a newspaper clipping across the desk. I scanned the article quickly before a slow smile spread across my face. James's school had fired him. Apparently, news of the affair had spread like wildfire. The administration didn't take kindly to a teacher sleeping with his wife's sister while living in a house paid for by his wife. Parents complained. It became a scandal, so they let him go. And Emma? She tried moving back in with your parents, Barbara said, eyes twinkling. But your dad wouldn't allow it. I blinked. Wait, what? Barbara chuckled. Your mother, of course, was ready to welcome her back. But your dad? Not so much. Seems even he had a limit. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. My father had always been the rational one, the peacemaker. For him to turn Emma away? That meant something. She's been bouncing between friends' couches ever since, Barbara continued. James, too. But I doubt they'll be playing houses anymore. I should have felt bad, but I didn't. They had both chosen this path. They had thrown away everything, my trust, my generosity, their own dignity for what? A cheap thrill? Some twisted fantasy? And now, they had nothing. A week later, I ran into Linda, James's mom, at the grocery store. She looked exhausted. The moment she saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. Oh, Olivia, she whispered, shaking her head. I am so sorry. I just nodded. I know. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I raised him better than this. I swear I did. I had nothing to say to that. Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't. At this point, it didn't matter. Where is he? I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. Linda let out a humorless laugh. Last I heard, sleeping in his car. I raised an eyebrow. He called us, begging for money, she admitted, shaking her head. George refused. Said if he was man enough to betray his wife, he should be man enough to figure out where to sleep at night. I couldn't help it. I smiled. Linda caught it and, to my surprise, smiled too. Honestly, she admitted, he deserves it. I wasn't going to argue. Before she left, she reached out and squeezed my hand. You deserved better than him, and you will find better. For the first time in a long time, I actually believed that. That night, I curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through my phone. Out of curiosity, I searched Emma's name on social media. Her latest post was a picture of her sitting in a tiny, dimly lit apartment. The caption? Starting over. Life is tough, but I'm tougher. The comments were brutal. People weren't fooled. Someone had already linked an article about the affair. Another comment simply read, Karma's a bitch, huh? I locked my phone and set it aside, smiling to myself. Karma really was a bitch. And for once, I didn't have to lift a single finger to make it happen. A few weeks later, I made some changes. I repainted the house, got new furniture, cleared out every single reminder of James and Emma. I even got a new last name. When the divorce was finalized, I took back my maiden name, Carter. It felt right. It felt good. It felt like me. And as I stood in my kitchen, sipping coffee in the morning light, I realized something. I had lost nothing. James and Emma? They had lost everything. The weeks that followed felt like the first deep breath after being underwater for too long. The house was mine, really mine now. No ghosts of betrayal lurking in the corners. No whispers of stolen glances behind my back. Just me, rebuilding, moving forward. I repainted the walls, bought new furniture, rearranged everything so it felt different, fresh, untarnished. The master bedroom, once a place of shared dreams and hidden lies, became my home office. My old office turned into a bright, cozy reading nook, just for me. Everything in my life had changed. And for the first time, I welcomed it. James and Emma didn't disappear entirely. Despite blocking them, their lives still found their way back to me through mutual acquaintances and social media. I never searched for them, but somehow, someone was always eager to tell me the latest. Emma was struggling. She had gone through a string of low-paying jobs, none lasting more than a month. She had no real savings, no stability, and after being rejected by our parents, she had to rely on distant friends who weren't keen on housing a known homewrecker. Her social media persona, once all smiles and curated happiness, started showing cracks. Posts about fake people and being betrayed by family flooded her page. It was laughable. She had betrayed me, and yet, in her twisted little world, she was the victim. James wasn't faring any better. After losing his teaching job, he bounced around, taking odd gigs to make ends meet. But in a town as small as ours, word had spread fast. No one wanted to hire a man who had publicly humiliated his wife and been fired for being morally questionable. Last I heard, he had left town. No job, no home, no reputation left to salvage. I guess they thought they'd have it all when they betrayed me. Turns out, they had nothing. One evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello? A pause. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in months. Olivia. It was Emma. Her voice was quiet, almost timid. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my wine. Wow. Didn't expect this, she sighed. I know I don't deserve to call you, but I didn't know who else to turn to. I raised an eyebrow. That's funny. I could have sworn you had James. A beat of silence. Then a shaky exhale. He left me. Of course he did. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. I'm pregnant, Liv, she whispered, her voice breaking. And I have nothing, I blinked. Pregnant. A million thoughts ran through my mind. Was it James's? Was she lying? Did she actually expect me to care? She sniffled. I just thought maybe as my sister you could help me. Just for a little while. I laughed. Not a soft chuckle, but a full, bitter laugh. Emma had some nerve. You must be out of your damn mind, I said, shaking my head. You think after everything I'd help you? Liv, please no. My voice was firm. You made your choice, Emma. You threw away your family for a man who didn't even stay. You took what wasn't yours and lost everything in the process. And now you expect me to clean up your mess? She let out a broken sob. I don't know what else to do. A tiny, distant part of me, the old me, might have felt bad. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had fought too hard to rebuild myself just to be dragged down by the same people who tried to destroy me. Figure it out, I said coldly. The way I had to. Then I hung up. And this time, I knew I'd never hear from her again. Months passed. Seasons changed. Life moved on, and so did I. I poured myself into work, into traveling, into new friendships that weren't built on obligation or shared history. For the first time in my life, I was living for me. Then, one afternoon, I met someone new. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for it. But there he was, kind, confident, with eyes that saw me and not just what I could offer. We started slow, no rush, no expectations. But with every conversation, every shared smile, I realized something. James and Emma had stolen years from me, but they hadn't stolen who I was. And they sure as hell hadn't stolen my future. I was finally free, and it felt damn good. Story 2, I'm Ella, and I've been watching my husband Mark gradually deteriorate for the last 2 years. I recall thinking the floor had vanished under my feet when we were originally told we had stomach cancer. Mark was just 38 years old, had a wonderful profession in investment banking, and we had a lovely kid named Ethan who was 9 years old. Decades were supposed to be ahead of us. The only bright spot in this horror was that we were able to pay for the best care possible because of Mark's financial success. We explored various medicines, traveled across the nation to see doctors, and spent every penny possible. However, as the months passed, it became evident that none of this treatment was providing a cure, only purchasing time. Mark's parents, Linda and Robert, were our pillars of support during it all. 20 minutes away, they took over without hesitation. When circumstances were difficult, Ethan will be picked up from school by Ella today. On days when Mark was supposed to receive treatment, Linda would say, also, don't bother about dinner. I've prepared more lasagna. When I put Ethan down at night, he would frequently tug on my sleeve. His eyes widened in dread and hope. When is Dad going to recover, Mom? I was at a loss for words. How do you break the news of a dying parent to a child? I simply brush his hair and tell him that the doctors are doing everything they can. My dear. The situation with my own parents, however, was different. My father, David, and mother, Karen, shared a home with Mark's parents. However, they may have easily been on a different planet. Could you come get Ethan from school today, Mom? Linda has a doctor's visit, and Mark is having a negative response to the chemotherapy. I'm very sorry, Ella, but we agreed to assist your sister in her search for an apartment today. It was always Jessica. You know how Jessica gets when she's anxious. All my life, it had been that way. Jessica had a cold when I was 7 years old, so my parents missed my school play. Even though Jessica was just in the ensemble, they departed immediately after the ceremony to see her dance recital when I graduated from high school. Over the years, I had become accustomed to it. His parents treated me more like a daughter than my own ever did, and Mark became a member of their family. I thus prepared myself for the inevitable last month, when Mark's condition deteriorated. I was holding Mark's hand, surrounded by the family that had picked me the night he passed away. The hospice nurse had told me it wouldn't be long after his breathing had gotten weak, hours earlier. "Ella," he said in a scarcely discernible whisper, "look after Ethan. The strongest person I've ever met is you." His final words were those. After holding his hand while a group called, I sat there for hours. I can't comprehend that. My 12-year partner had left. Within an hour after my call, Linda and Robert were at the hospital. The same sadness that consumed me was engraved on their faces. Linda put her arms around me and murmured, "We're here, sweetheart. We'll be here forever." I texted my mother that evening. "Tonight, Mark died." An hour later, she responded, "It's awful. No call, no invitation to visit." There was no doubt that Ethan and I were doing well. 2 words, but I didn't care since I was too numb. There was a boy to comfort, a funeral to organize, and a life to somehow reconstruct. Funeral preparations, paperwork, and attempting to inform Ethan that his father would not be returning home dominated the days after Mark's passing. Robert and Linda were present at every turn, taking care of funeral home calls when I was unable to speak and sitting with Ethan when he had inquiries that I was unable to respond to. I was overwhelmed with details the day before the funeral. The funeral home required final program decisions. I still had to pick up Ethan's outfit while distant relatives called for directions. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Mark died. I need to ask my folks to watch Ethan. As we sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by cards of sorrow, I told Linda, "Robert and you are already accomplishing a great deal." I practiced my speech for when we got to my parents' place, as I was driving Ethan there. With her purse already in hand, my mother, dressed in a light jacket, opened the door. "This isn't a good time, Ella," she stated, without even extending an invitation to enter. "We're about to go. Please, Mom, only for a few hours. We've been making preparations for weeks, and I have to make everything final for the funeral." My father interrupted, coming up behind my mom. "Right now, we can't cancel." Before I could continue to protest, after shutting the door behind them, they both went outdoors. My mother forcefully stated, "We really have to go. You can find someone else, I'm sure." Without even saying farewell to Ethan, who was standing there in confusion and pain, they rushed to their car. I contacted my friend Sarah after they left, and she agreed to watch him right away. Curiosity won over after I dropped Ethan off at Sarah's place. On my way home, I took a detour by my parents' house. Jessica's red Mazda was parked in the driveway, and the lights were on. With a sour laugh, I said to myself, "So that's the important plans." They had nothing to do. All they wanted was to support Jessica rather than me. Even today, I messaged our family WhatsApp group that evening. At 11 a.m., Mark will be buried at Greenwood Chapel on Thursday. There will be a brief reception after the service. I saw my parents and Jessica's names appear next to the read receipts. The night before the funeral, nobody responded. I called my mother instantly out of anxiety. "You did see my message concerning tomorrow's funeral, Mom? At 11 o'clock it begins." The line paused for a moment. "We're not going to be able to make it, Ella. I apologize." In honor of her promotion, Jessica has reserved many tables at Emilio's. We've already committed, and it's lunchtime. I almost dropped the phone. "This is Mark's funeral, Mom." We're referring about Mark, who covered the cost of fixing your home when the roof fell 3 years ago. Mark has been a member of our family for more than 10 years. Ella, that was a long time ago. My mom gave me a chilly response. The living must be our priority, not the deceased. Right now, Jessica needs our help. She hung up before I could answer her. I called Jessica's phone right away. My hands trembled in shock and rage. "Hello," she responded, seeming irritated that I had disrupted her night. "Jessica, your celebration tomorrow coincides with Mark's funeral, according to Mom. Are you unable to reschedule? Or at least reschedule it to allow them to be at the service first?" "No," she laughed. "Right now, I am unable to modify the reservation. Everyone has verified that this elevation is significant. I can't really postpone a funeral party or something like that." I said it again, raising my voice. "Jessica, my spouse is dead. The man who covered all of your college expenses. It was a long time ago. She brushed it off. Look, any funeral is not as essential as my advancement. Every day, people pass away. Then she also hung up. As if to twist the knife even further, I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, completely astonished. My mother sent me a message on my phone. Give up putting pressure on your sister. Some funeral is not as essential as her celebration. She put a lot of effort into getting this promotion. Bright and clear dawned on the day of Mark's funeral, a parody of the gloom I experienced within. The simplicity of the service was exquisite. People who had truly cared for Mark, including coworkers, friends, neighbors, and relatives, filled the little chapel. Mark had never been one for grandiose displays. At any rate, his family. I talked about Mark's compassion, generosity, and steadfast dedication to our kid throughout the eulogy. Robert gripped Ethan's hands while tears ran down his cheeks as he sat between Linda and Robert. Many individuals came up to me after the funeral to express their sympathies and inquire about my parents' absence. Mark's roommate from college remarked, "I was surprised not to see your folks. Are they sick?" They were already committed. I gave a stiff response, unwilling to go into further detail. After noticing my uneasiness, Linda skillfully changed the topic of conversation. I sat by myself in the living room that evening after everyone had left, surrounded by flower arrangements and condolence cards. Without Mark, the house felt incredibly empty. It hurt how loud the silence was. Jessica texted me, and my phone buzzed. I hope the funeral was a success. Mom shared pictures from my celebration, became a senior account executive after being promoted. Not a single condolence. No recognition of what I had just experienced. It was merely a celebration of her achievement, complete with emojis for parties. Without answering, I switched off my phone and went upstairs to see how Ethan was doing. He was holding on to the teddy bear that Mark had given him for his most recent birthday while he slept soundly. The steady rhythm of his breathing soothed me as I crawled into bed next to him. I spent the following week navigating life in a daze. Every day, Linda and Robert stopped by to help me organize Mark's stuff, bring food, and take Ethan to the park. Not once did my parents call to see how I was doing or to inquire about their grandson. Nothing. Mark's attorney, Mr. Simmons, called me a week after the funeral. "It's time to talk about Mark's will, Miss S. Turner," he clarified. He prepared himself with great care. Would the reading be possible tomorrow afternoon? After agreeing, I called Robert and Linda to extend an invitation. Naturally, they were mentioned in the will, and Mark would have preferred that. At exactly 2 p.m. the following day, Mr. Simmons showed up at our house with a leather briefcase and a serious expression that lightened upon seeing Ethan. "Your father talked about you a lot," he said to my son, formally shaking his little hand. "He was quite pleased with you. We all settled in the living room. Me, Ethan, Linda, and Robert. Ready for what?" I expected to be a straightforward reading market. I had discussed his wishes extensively during his illness, so there would be no surprises. But just as Mr. Simmons was about to begin, the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Linda asked, looking confused. "No," I replied, equally puzzled as I went to answer the door. I nearly slammed it shut when I saw my parents and Jessica standing on the porch, all wearing expressions of exaggerated sympathy. "What are you doing here?" I asked bluntly. "We heard about the wall reading," my mother said, trying to look past me into the house. "Mark wasn't a stranger to us, you know. We have a right to be here." "All right," I repeated incredulously. "You couldn't be bothered to come to his funeral, but you have a right to be at his will. Reading." My father cleared his throat. "Now, Ella, there's no need to bring up old grievances. We're here to support you." "Support me?" I gave a sour laugh. "That's right." But before I could shut the door, my mother gently pushed past me, with my father and Jessica following close behind. "We're family," she said firmly, as if that explained everything. I stood there, stunned by their audacity as they made their way to the living room. Linda and Robert's faces darkened when they saw who had arrived. "What are they doing here?" Robert whispered. When I returned, "I have no idea," I replied, my hands shaking with anger. "But I'm not going to make a scene in front of Ethan." Mr. Simmons, ever the professional, merely raised an eyebrow before continuing. Shall we proceed with the reading of the will? My parents and Jessica sat on the couch opposite Linda and Robert, with Ethan beside me in an armchair. The tension in the room was suffocating. I, Mark Andrew Turner, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. Mr. Simmons began reading from the formal document. Mark had left everything meticulously organized to his parents. He left $200,000, enough to ensure their comfortable retirement, and to thank them for their unwavering support throughout our marriage and his illness. We never expected, Linda began, her voice breaking as Robert held her hand tightly. Then came the main provisions to me. He left our house, 2 apartments in the city center that I hadn't even known he owned, and $400,000 in liquid assets. The apartments generate significant rental income, Mr. Simmons explained. Mark purchased them as investments 3 years ago. I sat there stunned by the extent of Mark's planning. He'd ensured Ethan and I would be financially secure no matter what. As Mr. Simmons continued reading, I noticed my mother's expression change from feigned sympathy to undisguised interest. Jessica sat up straighter, suddenly paying attention. When the lawyer finished, my mother clapped her hands together. Well, this is wonderful news, isn't it, Ella? You're quite well off now. The room fell silent. Linda and Robert stared at her in shock. My mother continued, oblivious to the tension with 2 apartments and all that money. You can certainly help out family now. Jessica has been suffering with rent on her house, haven't you, dear? Jessica nodded eagerly. It's so expensive these days, and you have 2 apartments just sitting there. What I was hearing was unbelievable. My spouse wasn't even called in his grave, and they were already examining his valuables. You should give one of those flats to Jessica. My father chimed in as if it were the most sensible proposal in the world. What do you need 2 for, anyway? I rose up slowly, my hands squeezed into fists at my sides. Are you serious right now? You miss Mark's funeral for a party, ignore me and Ethan for a week, then show up uninvited to his will, reading to claim his possessions. Now, Ella, my father started, his tone dismissive. There's no reason to be selfish. You're alone now. But you have all this wealth. You should share it. Selfish. I said it again, raising my voice. I'm not alone myself. Mark left everything for his son's future, and I have Ethan. Every dollar will be used to ensure that Ethan receives the greatest education, the greatest opportunities, and the finest life possible now that his father is unable to support him. I saw my sister and dad gaze at each other, their eyes darting to Ethan with an expression that uncannily resembled bitterness. You're being absurd, my mother yelled. Not some kid who won't even attend college for years, but Jessica needs support now. Is your grandson that child? Robert spoke forward, his voice tense with rage. His father also passed away recently. Anger made my mother's cheeks flush. You have no right to dictate to me how I should care for my own grandchild, she yelled at Robert. You haven't been in this family as long as we have. Despite this, you have demonstrated a striking lack of interest in participating. Linda gave a chilly response. That's sufficient. My patience eventually gave out as I spoke strongly. Could you please take a moment to walk upstairs to your room, Ethan? Show Mr. Simmons your model airplanes if you can. The lawyer swiftly jumped up and grasped Ethan's hand, obviously pleased to be out of the family turmoil. Young dude, I'd love to view your collection. I stopped holding back and turned to my sister and dad as soon as they were out of earshot. How dare you enter my home and demand my husband's money only days after his burial, which you couldn't even bring yourself to attend? Mark has dedicated his life to supporting Ethan and myself. He spent 2 years fighting cancer, and what assistance did you provide during all that time? Not at all. For several hours, you wouldn't even keep an eye on Ethan. It's unfair. I interrupted my father as he started. No. When your roof fell following the storm 3 years ago, Mark had to spend thousands of dollars fixing it, which is unfair. We paid for Jessica's whole college tuition when you said you couldn't afford it, which is unfair. Well, let me be really clear about this. I'm not going to give you any of Mark's assets or money. Never, ever. Every dollar will be used to help Ethan and ensure his future. That was Mark's desire. That's what's going to occur. Anger twisted my mother's face. You are an unappreciative jerk. What specifically have you done for me after everything that we have done for you? Mom? Give an example of a selfless parenting deed. She couldn't think of a response, so she opened and closed her lips. I had that thought. Silently, I said, "It's probably time for you all to go." Suddenly weary, I fell onto the couch as the door shut behind them. Did I do the right thing? Robert said in a soft yet forceful voice. Jessica is still my sister, and they are still my parents. Linda sat next to me and took my hand, saying, "Biology doesn't make family. Family is made of love. Being there creates family. Family is being there when things are tough." I nodded, still feeling the pain of rejection that had accompanied me all my life, even though I knew she was correct. I discovered that my mother had tagged me in a social media post when I got down at my computer later that evening, after Linda and Robert had left and Ethan had gone to bed. I'm devastated that, despite having 2 flats in the heart of the city and lots of money, my oldest daughter has become so avaricious and self-centered since her husband's death that she won't help her poor sister. Material prosperity has transformed her. I gazed at the screen as friends and family who only heard the warped version of the narrative. My mother provided them began to leave empathetic remarks. Don't allow LA get away with it. Family should support family. Jessica, poor Jessica, is always having trouble and LA has been given everything. A wave of rage overwhelmed me like I had never felt before. Even for my mother, attempting to publicly humiliate me into handing them. Mark's money was a new low. I inhaled deeply before I began typing. I would tell the public the complete, uncensored narrative of our family's problems if my mother decided to do so. I feel compelled to reply to my mother's decision to make our private family affairs public, even though I have been silent about it for far too long. After a 2-year struggle with stomach cancer, my husband Mark was buried 3 days ago. His funeral was not attended by my sister or parents. Why? Because they believed that my sister's promotion celebration, which she had planned for the same day, was more significant. For those who are unaware, Mark has provided numerous financial assistance to my parents over the years, including covering my sister's full college tuition and significant house renovations. Despite this, they were always too busy to help me throughout his sickness, even if it was simply to watch our son for a few hours. They arrived for the reading of Mark's will yesterday without being invited, after finding out that he had left our kid and I with a stable income. They requested right away that I give my sister one of our rental homes since, quote, she needed it more than a child. As their 9-year-old grandchild, that boy recently lost his father. I don't say this to offend them, but I'm sick of being portrayed as the bad guy in a tale, when all I've ever done is try to be a nice wife, mother, daughter, and sister. As Mark intended, the funds will be utilized for our son's education and future. I hope this makes everything obvious. I included the screenshots I had saved, which included many texts in which they refused to assist throughout Mark's sickness, and the one in which my mother stated that Jessica's party was more important than Mark's burial. Before I pushed the post button, my finger lingered over it for a few seconds. The tone of the comments on my mother's first post radically shifted in a matter of minutes. Is this accurate, Karen? You went to a party instead of your son-in-law's funeral? I'm shocked that you would anticipate LA to donate assets intended for her son. It is shocking to see those text messages. How could you claim that a funeral is less significant than a party? Throughout the evening, messages and calls were received. Friends and family have offered support and expressed shock at my parents' actions. In the comments, my mother attempted to accuse me of lying, but the screenshots were self-evident. She eventually completely removed her initial post, but the harm to her reputation had already been done. I discovered dozens of missed calls from Jessica and my parents when I woke up the following morning. Without checking their voicemails, I blocked their numbers. I had no interest in hearing what they had to say. They made every effort to get in touch with me during the ensuing weeks. Emails requesting money while pleading for forgiveness. Messages via mutual friends, including unexpected visits to our home. Every time I remained steadfast in my resolve to remove them from our lives. They won't ever change, will they? One afternoon, while we were watching Ethan play in the backyard, I asked Linda, "Seldom do people," she said. "Not substantially, to be honest. In any case, it's peculiar." I always believed that I required their affection and approval. I've worked for it all my life. But now, you see your own value now. For me, she completed. Ethan deserves more than to go through that cycle again, as you can see. Life had returned to its usual routine 6 months following Mark's passing. Robert and Linda were constants in our life, assisting with Ethan's schoolwork and coming to Sunday dinners with us. After Mark left us, I took over the management of the rental homes, and I was pleasantly surprised by the job. The city center flats proved to be great investments, bringing in a consistent income to help offset the money I saved for Ethan's schooling. I also put part of the money in shares of firms Mark had always believed in, watching with delight as the dividends flowed in. As for my parents and Jessica, I periodically got information through the family grapevine. They were having financial difficulties. It seems that my parents were whining about the expense of retirement and that Jessica had lost her job. Every time the sender would clumsily imply that maybe I might assist them, I always gave the same response. I'm sorry to hear that they're struggling, but I have a duty to my son. I was referred to as unforgiving or chilly by some. Perhaps I was, but I knew I had made the correct decision when I saw Ethan, surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, getting stronger and happier every day. He asked me a question that surprised me one night as I was putting him to bed. Do you ever miss Grandpa David and Grandma Karen, Mom? I took a moment to think of an honest response without bothering him with mature issues. I wish we had a relationship because I miss it. Finally, I said, but not the one we had. He nodded, as if he understood better than a youngster of his age ought to. I'm happy that Grandpa Robert and Grandma Linda are here. I agree, friend. I agree. Some people would never comprehend my decision to distance myself from my birth family. They had never known the ongoing letdown, the enduring pattern of partiality, or the agonizing insight that some people are just not able to prioritize others. However, I got it. More significantly, I had ended the cycle. Ethan would be surrounded by people who loved him with deeds rather than just words, and he would grow up knowing his value. People who didn't see him as a tool, who didn't place restrictions on their support, and who showed up when it mattered. Story 3, you can call me Abby Mitchell. This narrative starts 7 years ago, when I was still gullible enough to think that happy endings were possible, and I am currently 32. Jason Reynolds and I were engaged at the time, and we shared a little apartment. Since college, we have been together. I spent 5 years laying what I believed to be an unbreakable foundation for our future. Jason had black hair, was tall, and had a grin that easily won people over. I was just beginning my marketing job, and he was a financial counselor at a nearby company. We were comfortable but not wealthy, or so I believed. My younger sister, Olivia, and my parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, made up my family. She has been my parents' favorite from the day she was born, and she is 3 years younger than me. It was always Olivia, this, and Olivia that when I was growing up, they somehow always had an explanation for my activities, even though they were at all of her performances and games. But I had become accustomed to it. Jason proposed to me on our 5th anniversary, and it still hurts occasionally. I was ecstatic. Even though we had previously talked about marriage, I was nevertheless taken aback by the proposal. I told my parents the news over the phone that evening. Mom, Jason made a proposal. We're getting married. The person on the other end of the line paused. That's fantastic, honey. At last, my mother spoke in a rather flat tone. To celebrate, we should all gather. Her lack of excitement shocked me, but I assumed it was due to fatigue. When I called my sister, her response was even weirder. Olivia responded, "Oh well done, I suppose." "Thank you," I said, perplexed by her tone. "You should be my maid of honor, I hope." Naturally, she responded right away. I wouldn't miss it at all. I chose a simple wedding with Jason. We simply want family and close friends. About 50 persons in all. We reasoned that this would allow us to save money for a down payment on a home. However, we were taken aback when we met with our parents to go over the arrangements. With a bright smile, Jason's mother replied, "We would like to cover half of the wedding costs." My father also said, "And we'll cover the other half." My coffee almost suffocated me. Prior to college, My parents had never offered to cover any major expenses in my life. I saved money and took out a loan for my first automobile, but now they wanted to pay for part of my wedding. Are you certain? With a dubious glance at them, I inquired. We are certain, of course. As she patted my hand, my mother spoke. Abby, it's your big day. I should have recognized the warning signs back then, such as my father's odd smile and my mother's avoidance of eye contact. But I decided to disregard it all since I was so ecstatic with their surprise gift. The budget is no longer an issue. I made the decision to buy my dress. It was a stunning A-line down with beautiful lace sleeves and an endless train that I discovered at a downtown store. When I tried it on, I realized it was more expensive than I had ever spent on anything. It was the one I knew. My outfit was meticulously spread out in the backseat of my car as I went to my parents' house. Olivia was splayed out on the couch, looking through her phone as I entered the living room. When I walked in, she hardly raised her head. I said, "Hey, Liv, I wanted to show you everyone my wedding gown." She looked up at her board of expressions. Fantastic. I gently opened the garment bag and took out the dress, trying not to let her attitude depress me. My mom let out a gasp. Abby, oh, it is beautiful. I pressed it to my body. Being beaming isn't flawless. As soon as I saw it, I fell in love. Olivia's face took on a strange green tint. It must be pleasant to have parents who cover all expenses, she whispered. Only half of it is being paid for by them. I corrected her. The remainder is being covered by Jason's parents. In any case, she lost her temper, snatched up her phone, and hurried out of the room. My mom let out a sigh. Don't worry about her. She is only envious, I said, carefully returning the outfit to its suitcase. I'm used to it. I was too. Olivia had always been jealous of everything. Every time I received an A in school, I attempted to outdo myself. She had put in endless effort to earn a plus. She felt compelled to date the football team's captain when I started dating Jason. I was astonished at how enthusiastically my mother put herself into the wedding planning during the following few weeks. She phoned me many times a day to go over meal selections, seating charts, flower arrangements, and a ton of other things. I hadn't even thought about it. Jason started acting suspiciously as the wedding date drew near. He had grown aloof, frequently gazing out into space. As I was conversing with him, he would grin and respond that he was simply thinking about work or the wedding when I inquired how things were going. My mother asked us to supper a week prior to the wedding. As we traveled to my parents' place, Jason was abnormally anxious. Are you all right? I reached out to grasp his hand and asked. All right? He said sharply, removing his hand to adjust the radio. Olivia was already there when we got there, dressed in a dress that didn't seem appropriate for a casual family meal. She greeted Jason with an embrace that was a bit too lengthy, and I saw him tense up a little before returning the hold. It was a stressful dinner. My father continued to clumsily clean his throat. My mother's grin appeared forced and set. Jason was shoving food about his plate without eating much, and Olivia continued sneaking looks at him. I excused myself to go to the restroom in the hopes that some alone time would help me get rid of the weird sensation that had descended upon me. I saw something that chilled me to the bone when I returned. Jason was sitting close to Olivia. She was giggling at something he had said, and their heads were hunched over one another. My mother was observing them with a peculiar, somewhat contented smile on her face. What's happening? Standing at the edge of the dining room, I inquired. For a second, everyone's heads snapped up. No one said anything. Olivia then flashed a smug, victorious look that made my stomach knot. Don't you think it's time we tell her? With a glance at Jason, she said, told me what I asked for. My voice was trembling a little. Olivia put her hand on Jason's arm as she reached across. With a tone full of delight, she declared that she and Jason had been dating for 6 months. It's me he loves, not you. Jason merely gazed at his plate as I looked at him, expecting him to laugh or tell her she was insane. Is this accurate? I questioned him. His face was pallid as he glanced up at last. I apologized to Abby. I didn't intend for it to occur. The room began to swirl. I steadied myself by holding onto the back of a chair. So you all chose to surprise me over dinner? I surveyed the table. My dad refused to look at me. My mother's expression seemed strangely serene. The wedding has begun. The wedding has not been called off. Suddenly, my mother said, everything has been paid for by us. Olivia will just step in for you. The words struck me like a punch to the body. I was having trouble breathing, unable to think. Are you crazy? I was able to utter it at last. You can't just show up to my own wedding in my place. It's no longer your wedding, Olivia smirked. I own it. Desperate to have someone support me, I appealed to my father. Dad. He cleared his throat. Abby, your mother is correct. Everything has already been paid for by Jason's parents and us. Canceling now would be a waste. With my palms clenched into fists, I said, I don't care about the money. Olivia was grinning smugly, and I wanted to jump across the table and wipe it off. I'm getting married today. I apologize, Abby. Weakly, Jason remarked. Were you all aware of this? I inquired. I was coming to the terrible realization. Is that the reason you volunteered to cover the wedding expenses? You had this all planned out, didn't you, Mom? Before responding, my mother paused for an excessive amount of time. Obviously not. Everything was shown to me in that little interval. You waited until a week before the wedding, but why? To inform me. My voice broke as I asked. Jason didn't say anything, but Olivia wasn't hesitant. She shrugged. Jason was too much of a coward to tell you himself. I had to act on my own initiative. Feeling nauseous, I moved away from the table. I'm going. Remember to leave your wedding gown behind. After me, Olivia called. Her tone was informal and light. Now I'll need it. Without responding, I hurried out of the home. I struggled with my vehicle keys while crying uncontrollably. Since the lease was in Jason's name, I had to vacate the apartment we shared, so I drove back there. I didn't weep when I arrived. I couldn't get myself to weep. I started tossing my clothing into my suitcases after grabbing them. The bridal gown was then hanging on the closet door. I grabbed a pair of scissors and started chopping it up right away. Snip, snip, snip. Every wound seemed like retaliation. I left the leftovers strewn all over the bed that we had shared. I dialed Kate, my best friend who lived on the other side of town. Can I spend some time with you? When she responded, I inquired. Of course, she answered. What's the matter? You sound awful. I'll clarify when I arrive. My voice was empty as I spoke. It's finished. The wedding has begun. I cried all night long on her couch until I was completely dry. Kate brought me tea and Kleenex as she sat with me and held my hand. I abstained from alcohol. What will you do at this point? As dawn light came in through her blinds, she inquired. Everyone invited to the wedding has to get an email from me. My voice was husky from sobbing as I said, Inform them that it's off. I shook my hands and sent out a mass email because of unanticipated events. There will not be a wedding between Jason Reynolds and me. Please accept my apologies for any inconvenience. Instantly, the answers began to pour in. Friends were shocked and felt sorry for them. What took place? Are you okay? They asked. I couldn't take having to repeat it. Then, however, came the family texts. We got a call from your mom. The wedding is still going on, she said. However, Olivia is now the bride. Abby, what's happening on? Unable to handle it all at work, I shut off my phone. I headed directly to the office of my employer. I'd always been nice to Tom, not so much a boss as a mentor. He looked up from his computer as soon as I stepped in, and his face instantly altered. Abby? What's the matter? I told him everything. The words are rushing out of me. His expression was thunderous when I was done. He stated firmly, Those people don't deserve you, and I may have an answer. He clarified that our business will be establishing a new branch office in a different state. To help get things going, they required an experienced person. According to him, the job includes a substantial rise and a relocation package. If you desire it, you can have it. I didn't think twice. When can I begin? What about next week? I was flying across the nation the day before Olivia and Jason's wedding. I came with nothing except my clothing and personal belongings, but the corporation had set up a complete flat for me. I pushed myself into my new career, taking on extra assignments and spending longer hours than were necessary. When my supervisor saw, he was impressed. I received my first promotion 6 months later, and then another year. Every time I climbed the corporate ladder, my pay rose. I gathered enough money for a down payment on my own apartment 3 years after I moved. Even though the home payments were substantial, my earnings was sufficient. I had something significant, something wholly my, for the first time in my life. The only relative I kept in touch with was my mother's sister, Aunt Meredith. She occasionally visited and made monthly calls. She didn't bring up my parents until I asked, and I didn't often ask. During one of her trips, she delivered me news that I hadn't requested. Olivia reluctantly announced that she had another kid. Now there are 3. Well done, I gave a bland response. I don't work at Meredith, she added. For Jason, your parents obtained company financing. I sipped my coffee and nodded. How kind of them. Meredith also looked at my face. You don't give a damn, do you? No, I answered plainly. I don't. In all honesty, when I learned about them, I felt nothing. No remorse, no rage, no happiness. I had come to know them as strangers, mostly forgotten characters from a novel I read a long time ago. It was 7 years later. I received many sizable bonuses, which allowed me to pay off my mortgage early. I was financially secure, had friends, a fulfilling work, a wonderful life, and most importantly, freedom. I was at last at ease. My phone called with an unknown number on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Something forced me to answer even though I was on the verge of leaving it on voicemail. Hi there? A pause occurred. Then, it's your mother, Abby. Don't hang up, please. I am aware that I am not authorized to phone you. I am aware that what we did was unacceptable. But just listen, please. I remained silent. I could hear what seemed like a child weeping in the background as we let the stillness linger. When I didn't answer, she went on, Things are bad, Abby. Very terrible. Jason's company was a total failure. The loans that I and your father obtained for him, we are unable to reimburse them. Our home is under threat of foreclosure from the bank. I laughed resentfully. And I'm worried about this. Specifically, how? 6 months ago, Olivia and Jason lost their home. Ignoring my inquiry, she continued, Since then, all 3 of their children have lived with us. Olivia is not employed. You are aware. She hasn't. Since the firm failed, Jason's image has been damaged, and he is currently unable to get employment any place in the area. Why you are telling me all of this is still a mystery to me. Even though I knew what was coming, I stated it bluntly. She inhaled deeply. Abby, we need your help? Financial assistance? I currently work double shifts at the hospital. Additionally, your father returned to work at the hardware shop after retiring. However, it is insufficient. We are hardly able to maintain the lights. Moreover, there are 3 little children living there. I was going to end the call so she could know exactly where to take her issues. All of a sudden, a thought came to me. A great, wicked concept. I might be willing to help on one condition, I added gently. 3 weeks from now comes Thanksgiving. You'll have a large family meal when I return to town. Grandma Mitchell, Uncle Paul, Meredith, and all of the cousins are invited. A formal family reunion will be held. Of course, she answered enthusiastically. That would be wonderful. I'll extend an invitation to everyone. You have no idea what this implies. Before she could put my phone down, I hung up. I reclined in my office chair and gazed at my adoptive city's cityscape outside the window. A little smile appeared on my face. I was finally going to have my retribution and closure after 7 years. I carefully planned my journey over the course of the following 3 weeks. The motel lived up to the website's description. I ordered room service, had a lengthy bath, and slept well after checking in. I took my time getting ready for Thanksgiving Day the next day. I didn't want to get there too soon. It was preferable to arrive while the majority of the family members were there. I drove up in front of my parents' house at exactly 4 p.m. In contrast to what I remembered, the place appeared run down. Around the windows, the paint was flaking off. The yard and the front stairs drooped a little. My father's pride and delight were once neglected and overgrown. I took a seat in the car and braced myself for what was about to happen. I then went to the door after grabbing the little purse that held my gift. The first knock was answered by my mother. A smile that stopped short of her eyes lighted up her face. Abby, you arrived. She made a move to give me a hug, but I avoided the touch and walked past her into the home. I promised to, I answered calmly. The house's outside was far superior than its interior. The furniture looked just as I recalled, but there were shabby, warm toys all over the floor of the living room, and I could hear kids talking from farther away. Olivia was laying the table in the kitchen when my mother ushered me inside. As I walked in, she glanced up, and I could see the gleam of jealousy in her eyes as she saw my looks, my attire, and my evident success. She was heavier than when I had last seen her, and her eyes had black bags under them. She wore inexpensive, rather outdated clothing. "Hi, Olivia," I said in a really sweet voice. "You appear worn out." 3 young children and a stressed-looking guy I could hardly identify as Jason entered the kitchen before she could reply. He had aged poorly. He had grown a punch, and his hairline had receded. He felt like a deer caught in headlights when he spotted me. There was an unsettling stillness in the kitchen. My father, who appeared older and more stooped than I recalled, came in the rear door. He smiled tentatively when he saw me. "You made it, Abby." "Yes, I did." I continued to speak in a friendly manner. "You all appear to be quite busy. Shall I return later?" My mother hurriedly responded, No. Everything is in order. The family should be here any moment now, and the turkey is almost done. Would you mind taking a seat in the living room? Let me get you a drink." I nodded and made my way to the living room, conscious of the hushed discussion that had begun as soon as I had left the room. The first family arrived, and I had just seated down when the doorbell rang. Family members, some of whom I hadn't seen in years, began to fill the house over the course of the next 30 minutes. I had maintained contact with others while I was at Meredith. Dinner was served at last. My mother continued to direct the conversation toward me during the lunch. My work, my urban life. I gave as little information as possible in my courteous, but succinct response. Olivia's expression was displaying increasing displeasure as the attention continued to be directed at me rather than her or her kids. It was a store-bought pumpkin pie for dessert. My mom looked at me thoughtfully. "Maybe before we serve the pie, Abby, you want to say something." It was this. The time she had been anticipating. The time I had been anticipating. After straightening my outfit, I got up and surveyed the table. Everyone was watching me. Some expectant, some curious. Olivia and my parents were grinning, presumably waiting for me to reveal financial assistance. Perhaps even believing that I made the decision to forget and forgive. They were completely mistaken. "Thank you to everyone who came today." With a clear and firm voice, I started. "I haven't been in this house for a while, and there's a reason for that. I believe some of you are aware of the cause, but others might not be." Uncertainty started to seep onto my mother's face as her grin faded. "I was scheduled to get married 7 years ago. I had invites sent out, a location reserved, and a stunning dress. It shocked me at the time that my parents, who had never before showed any interest in helping me, had volunteered to cover half of the wedding expenses. As I talked, I looked straight at my mother and saw her face become white. I learned the truth a week prior to the wedding. The worst thing was that my sister Olivia had been having an affair with my fiancé, Jason. My mother cut me off with a warning in her voice. "Abby, it's not the right time or location." "It's precisely this time and location," I smoothly countered. I looked back to the family table, where several of them were looking more and more uneasy. The affair was known to my parents. Actually, they had always intended for Olivia to attend the wedding instead of me. They only told me a week prior to the wedding when they surprised me at a similar family meal and told me that the wedding would still just involve my sister, rather than me, as the bride. Meredith, who was already familiar with the situation, reached over and gave me a supportive squeeze as gasps and whispers echoed around the table. My mother told me that since they had paid for the wedding, I had no right to cancel it, but I persisted. Olivia contacted me as I was leaving that evening to urge me to leave my wedding dress for her because I would no longer need it. The following day, I packed my belongings, went home, and tore that outfit to pieces before leaving town. Since then, I have not communicated with any of them. There was an overwhelming quiet around the table. My dad's eyes were fixed on his plate. It appeared as though Jason wanted to burrow through the floor. The expression on my mother's face was one of controlled fear. I continued till my mother unexpectedly contacted me 3 weeks ago. Jason's business endeavor, which was financed by my parents' finances, appears to have flopped miserably. The loss of their home is imminent. After losing their own children, Olivia, Jason, and their 3 are now residing here. They have recently contacted me for financial assistance after 7 years of quiet. I took out a little letter from my handbag and opened it. 5 clean $100 were taken out and put on the table. "You deserve this." I looked them everyone in the eye as I spoke. $500. I want you to know just how little your treachery matters to me, not because you need it, right now. I could provide you with much more, but that would be a sign of concern, which I don't have. No more. I turned to speak to the other family members seated at the table. I'm sorry for spoiling Thanksgiving dinner for everyone. Even though it wasn't my objective, I couldn't allow them to keep up the farce of seeming like we're a single, happy family, when in reality they abandoned me whenever it was convenient. I moved in the direction of the door. Meredith was first to follow as I heard chairs grinding behind me. My cousins Mark and Sarah came next, followed by Uncle Paul. Over half of the table had stopped eating by the time I got to the front door. That night, I slept better than I had in a long time. I left my hometown again in the morning, checking out early and driving to the airport, this time with the knowledge that I would never go back. Meredith phoned a week after I got home. "Well, you definitely made an impression," she remarked, her tone tinged with adoration. "How awful is it?" I inquired. "I'm not sure whether I was that concerned." "Very bad," she said. "Your parents are not being spoken to. Jennifer hung up on your mother when she called her yesterday to borrow some cash." I said, "That's not my problem. Your dad says they may have to file for bankruptcy," she added. "They tried to keep Jason's firm going by spending all of their retirement funds." I strongly said that it was still not my concern. "I understand," she moaned. "I simply wanted to let you know. In my opinion, you made the correct decision. They had to deal with the fallout from their deeds." My mother sent me a Christmas card 2 months later. There was a lengthy, meandering letter inside expressing her regret, how much she missed me, and how hard it was for them to maintain their home. Without finishing it, I ripped it up and threw the fragments in the garbage. Some injuries never completely recovered. Some betrayals are too painful to overlook. But in the 7 years after my life collapsed, I've discovered something significant. There are occasions when the family you pick is considerably superior to the one you were born into.